Jake Mathers had learned early that the world was not kind to those who showed weakness. At 34, his face bore the marks of countless fights, weathered by sun and scarred by violence. His hands were calloused from rope and iron, quick to draw the Colt that hung low on his hip. He trusted no one completely and expected the same in return. The town of Copper Creek barely deserved the name. A dozen buildings huddled against the desert like scared animals, their wood bleached gray by the relentless Arizona sun. Jake rode in just as the church bell was ringing for evening services, though he had no intention of darkening any doorway that promised salvation. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, pushing his black gelding through terrain that would break lesser horses. The animal beneath him was as hard as its rider, scarred, lean, and dangerous when cornered. Together, they made an imposing sight that caused folks to step aside and mothers to pull their children closer. The saloon stood at the far end of the main street, its painted sign so faded that only someone who could read might guess it once said, "Lucky Dollar." Jake tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped through the swinging doors, spurs jingling against the worn wooden floor. The interior was what he expected. Dim, smoky, and filled with the kind of men who had reasons for being far from civilization. A few looked up when he entered, sized him up, and returned to their drinks. One man at the bar wore a deputy's badge and nursed a whiskey like it held the answers to life's problems. Jake ordered bourbon and leaned against the bar, listening to the conversations around him. Most were the usual complaints about weather, cattle prices, and wives. But one table in the corner held his attention. 3 men spoke in low voices about something that made them nervous. "She won't last another day out there," one was saying. "Not with them Apaches stirred up like they are." "Should have minded her own business," another replied. "Schoolmarm had no call getting mixed up in tribal matters." The deputy at the bar turned around. "You boys talking about Miss Caroline again? I told you. Sheriff's doing what he can. Got word to Fort Bowie for help." Jake took another sip of his bourbon. He'd heard this story before, in different towns with different names. Some fool do-gooder gets in over their head, and the whole community wrings their hands about it. Usually ended badly. "What exactly happened?" Jake asked, surprising himself by speaking up. The deputy looked him over carefully. "You new in town, mister. Don't recall seeing you before. Just passing through. Curious about the fuss." One of the men from the corner table stood up and walked over. He was tall and thin, with the look of someone who made his living with his hands. "Name's Pete Hawkins. I run the livery here. You asking because you're thinking of helping, or just want something to talk about over your drink?" Jake studied the man's face. Pete had honest eyes, which was rare in Jake's experience. "Depends on what the story is." Pete glanced at the deputy, who nodded. "Week ago, Miss Caroline Porter, she's our school teacher, went out to the Apache settlement about 15 miles north. She'd been teaching some of their children to read English, with permission from their chief. Good woman, though maybe too trusting for her own good. What went wrong? Bunch of white traders showed up at the settlement," the deputy continued. "Started trouble over some horses they claimed were stolen. Shooting started, and when the smoke cleared, 2 Apache boys were dead. Miss Caroline tried to stop it, testified to what really happened." Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd seen this before, too. "Let me guess. The traders had friends in high places." "Worse," Pete said. "Turns out they were working for Gerald Mackenzie. He owns half the territory and wants the other half. Having Apache troubles gives him excuse to push for military action, claim more land." "So where's the school teacher now?" "Hiding with a group of Apache women and children. They're holed up in Devil's Canyon, about 20 miles from here. Mackenzie's got men out there, waiting for them to show themselves. Army's too far away to help in time." Jake finished his bourbon and set the glass down. "Sounds like a mess that'll sort itself out one way or another." The deputy's face darkened. "That's a cold way to look at it, stranger. We're talking about innocent folks dying." Innocent folks die every day, Jake replied, usually because someone else made stupid choices for them. Pete stepped closer. Miss Caroline ain't stupid. She's probably the smartest person in this territory. She just believes people can be better than they are. Then she's a fool, Jake said flatly. World doesn't work that way. The saloon had gone quiet. Even the piano player had stopped his lazy tune. Jake could feel hostile eyes on him from every direction. You're wrong about her, Pete said quietly. Caroline Porter saved my boy's life 2 years back, nursed him through fever when the doctor said there was nothing to be done, sat by his bed for 6 days straight, never asked for nothing in return. Jake shrugged. Good for her. Still doesn't change the fact that kindness gets people killed out here. Maybe, the deputy said. But so does doing nothing when you could help. Jake turned toward the door, then stopped. Something about this story bothered him, though he couldn't say what. Maybe it was the way these men talked about this Caroline Porter, like she was something special. In his experience, people were disappointing once you got to know them. This school teacher, he said without turning around. How'd she end up out here? This isn't exactly the place for delicate flowers. She came from back east 3 years ago, Pete answered. Lost her whole family in a fire. Said she wanted to go somewhere she could make a real difference. And has she? Made a difference? Pete smiled for the first time since the conversation started. Visit our school sometime. Children who couldn't write their own names are reading books. Apache kids and white kids learning together. She made us all see things different. Jake faced the room again. Where exactly is Devil's Canyon? The deputy straightened up. You thinking of riding out there? Because if you are, I should warn you. Mackenzie's got at least 15 men watching the approaches. They got orders to shoot anyone who gets too close. How do you know their orders? Because my cousin works for Mackenzie. Good man led astray by steady pay. He told me they're planning to wait until the Apache get desperate enough to try breaking out. Then they'll claim self-defense when they gun them down. Jake considered this information. 15 men was a lot, but not impossible odds if a man was smart about it. The real problem would be getting the school teacher and whoever was with her out of the canyon without getting them killed in the crossfire. What's in it for anyone brave enough or stupid enough to try helping? He asked. Pete looked confused. What do you mean? I mean payment. What's she worth to you people? The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, the deputy spoke up. We took up a collection. Got about $40 between us. Jake almost laughed. $40 wouldn't buy decent ammunition for a job like this. These people had no idea what they were asking for. That's insulting, he said. You want someone to ride against 15 guns for $40? It's all we got, Pete said defensively. Most folks here are just scraping by. Jake walked to the door again, then stopped. The smart thing would be to ride out now, find another town, another bottle, another card game. He'd done it 100 times before. This wasn't his fight, and these weren't his people. But something nagged at him. Maybe it was the way Pete talked about this woman, like she actually gave a damn about other people. Jake had known plenty of folks who claimed to care, but when trouble came, they scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Devil's Canyon, he said. How many ways in and out? The deputy pulled out a piece of paper and started sketching. Main entrance here from the south. There's a narrow trail on the east side, but it's treacherous. Most of the north wall is sheer rock, except for one spot where the creek cuts through. That's probably how they got in. Jake studied the rough map. Where are Mackenzie's men positioned? Far as we know, they got the main entrance covered and men watching the east trail. The north passage is too dangerous for horses, so they probably figure nobody would try it. What about water in the canyon? Spring-fed creek runs through it. They won't die of thirst, but food's another matter. Mackenzie knows it too. He's playing a waiting game. Jake folded the map and put it in his pocket. I'll need supplies. Food, ammunition, medicine if you got it. Pete's eyes widened. You're really going to do it? I'm thinking about it, but not for $40. I want information instead. What kind of information? Gerald Mackenzie. I want to know everything about him. His business, his habits, where he lives, who he trusts. Everything. The deputy frowned. You planning something beyond just rescuing Miss Caroline? Jake didn't answer directly. A man like Mackenzie doesn't stop with one school teacher. He'll keep pushing until someone pushes back harder. That sounds like you're planning a war, Pete said. Maybe I am. Question is, are you folks ready for one? Because once I ride out there, Mackenzie will know this town was involved. He won't just forget about it. The saloon erupted in nervous conversation as men realized what Jake was suggesting. Some voices called for caution, others for action. Above it all, the deputy's voice cut through. "Hold on!" he shouted. "Everyone just hold on a minute!" The room quieted down. The deputy looked at Jake with new respect and suspicion. "Mister, you got a name?" "Jake Mathers." A few men exchanged glances. The name clearly meant something to them, though Jake couldn't tell if it was good or bad. "Jake Mathers," the deputy repeated slowly. "You wouldn't be the same Jake Mathers who cleaned out the Cartwright gang up in Tucson?" "Might be. And the Jake Mathers who had that trouble with the railroad men in El Paso." "Depends on what you heard about it." Pete whistled low. "No wonder you're not worried about 15 men. Story goes, you took on twice that many in Tucson." Jake didn't correct him. Reputation was a useful thing, even when it was exaggerated. "Look," he said to the room in general, "I can probably get your school teacher out of that canyon. But like I said, there will be consequences. Mackenzie will come at this town hard once he figures out who helped her escape." An older man near the back stood up. "Name's John Brennan. I was mayor here for 8 years before Mackenzie started throwing his weight around. What you're saying is, we got a choice between watching Caroline die or starting a fight we might not win. That's about the size of it." Brennan looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. "Show of hands. Who's willing to take the risk?" Every hand in the saloon went up, including the deputy's. Jake felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. He'd been in towns where people sold each other out for the price of a drink. These folks were willing to risk everything for one woman they believed was worth saving. "All right," he said finally. "I'll need those supplies and that information about Mackenzie. But I work alone. No one follows me. No one tries to help unless I specifically ask for it. Understood?" The men nodded their agreement. "One more thing," Jake added. "When I bring her back, if I bring her back, I want to meet this school teacher. Want to see what kind of person inspires this much loyalty." Pete smiled again. "Oh, you'll understand once you meet her. Caroline has a way of making people believe in things they'd given up on." Jake doubted that, but kept his opinion to himself. In his experience, people were people, selfish, scared, and looking out for themselves first. This Caroline Porter would probably turn out to be just another person who talked a good game until the chips were down. But as he walked out of the saloon to prepare for what might be the most dangerous job of his career, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong about people being disappointing. He'd find out soon enough. Jake spent the rest of the evening gathering supplies and information. Pete Hawkins proved more useful than expected, providing detailed maps of the territory and a surprising amount of intelligence about Mackenzie's operation. The deputy, whose name turned out to be Tom Hendricks, contributed ammunition and a spare rifle that had seen better days but would shoot straight when needed. The most valuable information came from an unexpected source. A weathered Apache man named Joseph Bluehorse appeared at the livery stable just after midnight, moving like a ghost through the shadows. "You are the one who will help Teacher Caroline," he said in careful English. It wasn't a question. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then stopped when he saw the old man's peaceful posture. "How did you know?" Word travels fast among my people. We know white men plan to rescue our teacher. We know you are dangerous man, but not evil man. How can you tell the difference? Joseph smiled, revealing teeth worn down by years of hard living. Evil men would not ask such questions. You want to know about Canyon? About my people hiding there? Jake nodded, realizing this conversation could save lives or get them all killed, depending on how it went. 7 women, 4 children, teacher Caroline. They have food for maybe 3 more days. Water is good from creek, but they cannot hunt, cannot gather plants. Mackenzie's men watch like buzzards waiting for death. What about weapons? 2 rifles, not much ammunition. Women know how to use them, but children? Joseph shrugged. Children should not have to fight wars made by foolish men. Jake agreed with that sentiment, though he'd seen too many children forced into conflicts they didn't understand. Can you get me into the canyon without being seen? Yes, but is dangerous path. You must trust Apache guide, and I think you do not trust Easy. The old man was right. Trust had gotten Jake into trouble more than once. But looking at Joseph's weathered face, Jake sensed someone who understood the weight of keeping one's word. What's in this for you? Why risk helping a white stranger? Joseph's expression grew serious. Teacher Caroline is daughter of my heart, though not of my blood. 3 summers ago, sickness came to our village. Many children died. White doctor would not come, said we were not worth his time. Jake waited for the rest of the story. Teacher Caroline came instead. She knew medicine from books, had supplies from her own money, worked day and night for 2 weeks, saved many lives, including my grandson. Since then, she has been family to us. And now her family is trapped in that canyon. Yes, so we help each other. Apache way and white way, together for once. Jake made his decision. What time do we leave? Before dawn. Meet me at Red Rocks north of town. Bring horse, but be ready to walk. Path into canyon is not for riding. Joseph melted back into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. Jake spent the remaining hours before dawn checking his weapons and trying to get some rest. Sleep came in fitful snatches, filled with dreams of other rescues that had gone wrong. The ride to the Red Rocks took an hour through country that seemed determined to hide every kind of danger nature could devise. Cactus, rattlesnakes, hidden arroyos that could break a horse's leg, and always the possibility of running into Mackenzie's sentries. Joseph was waiting as promised, along with a younger Apache man he introduced as his nephew David. Both wore traditional clothing, mixed with practical additions like leather boots and wide-brimmed hats that could have come from any ranch in the territory. David knows secret ways through rocks, Joseph explained. He will take you to Canyon while I watch for Mackenzie's men. The next 3 hours tested every skill Jake had learned in 20 years of dangerous living. The path Joseph had chosen wound through boulder fields and narrow crevices that seemed impossible to navigate. Several times Jake was certain they were lost, only to have David point out handholds carved into rock faces by generations of Apache travelers. They moved in complete silence, communicating through hand signals that David taught Jake as they climbed. The young Apache moved like water, flowing around obstacles, never seeming to hurry but covering ground faster than Jake would have thought possible. Finally, David held up a warning hand and pointed ahead. They had reached the rim of Devil's Canyon. Jake crawled forward on his belly and looked down into a natural fortress that explained why the Apache had chosen this place for refuge. The canyon was deeper and more defensible than the rough map had suggested. Steep walls rose on 3 sides, broken only by the narrow creek entrance at the north end. Trees and brush provided cover near the creek, while caves in the canyon walls offered shelter from weather and watching eyes. Jake could see smoke from a carefully concealed fire and movement that suggested people trying to stay hidden while going about the business of survival. Somewhere down there was the school teacher these people were willing to die for. David tapped Jake's shoulder and pointed to a narrow ledge that zigzagged down the east wall. The path looked like suicide on horseback, but might be manageable on foot with someone who knew where to step. The descent took another hour of careful climbing. Jake's hands were bleeding by the time they reached the bottom, and his respect for Apache climbing skills had increased considerably. David moved ahead to make contact with the refugees, while Jake waited in the cover of a large boulder. A few minutes later, David returned with one of the Apache women. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes that studied Jake like she was solving a puzzle. "I am Maria Cloudwalker," she said in English better than Joseph's. "Teacher Caroline wishes to speak with you." Jake followed Maria through the brush toward the hidden camp. What he saw surprised him. Instead of desperate people huddled in panic, he found an organized group that had adapted to their situation with remarkable efficiency. The women had created a camp that used every advantage the canyon offered. Sleeping areas were set up in shallow caves that provided protection from wind and observation. A cooking area near the creek used rocks to channel smoke and disperse it before it could be seen from above. Even the children were organized, with older ones helping watch the younger while adults worked. And in the center of it all was Caroline Porter. Jake's first thought was that she wasn't what he had expected. The men in town had talked about her like she was some kind of saint. But the woman who rose to greet him looked like someone who could handle whatever life threw at her. She was tall for a woman, with brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and clothes that had been modified for life in the wilderness. Her face showed the strain of recent events, but her eyes held steady when she looked at him. "Mr. Mathers, I presume," she said, extending a hand that showed calluses from hard work. "I understand you've come to help us?" Jake shook her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. "Miss Porter, I've come to get you out of here before Mackenzie's men decide to stop waiting." "I appreciate that truly, but I need you to understand something before we discuss any rescue plans. These women and children are my responsibility now. Whatever we do, it has to include all of them." Jake had expected this, but it still complicated everything. Moving 9 people through hostile territory isn't the same as moving 1. The chances of someone getting killed go up considerably. "I understand that, but I won't abandon people who are in danger because of me." "They're in danger because some white men started shooting," Jake corrected. "You didn't pull those triggers." Caroline's expression softened slightly. "No, but I chose to get involved. And choice comes with responsibility." Jake studied her face, looking for signs of the naive idealism that usually got do-gooders killed. Instead, he saw someone who understood exactly how dangerous their situation was, but refused to let fear change her principles. "All right," he said finally. "We'll figure out how to move everyone. But I'm in charge of how we do it. No arguments, no second-guessing. Agreed?" "Agreed, as long as your plans don't involve sacrificing some to save others." Jake almost smiled. This woman was negotiating with him like she had any real choice in the matter. Fair enough. Now show me what we're working with. The next few hours gave Jake a new appreciation for what Caroline had accomplished. The Apache women had accepted her as a leader not because she was white or educated, but because she had proven herself through action. She spoke their language well enough to communicate complex ideas, knew their customs well enough to avoid giving offense, and had earned their trust by putting herself at risk for their families. She also knew practical skills that surprised Jake. Caroline could start a fire without matches, knew which plants were safe to eat, and had basic knowledge of treating wounds and illness. She might have come from the civilized East, but she had adapted to frontier life with remarkable success. "How did you learn all this?" he asked, as she showed him how the camp's water system worked. I read every book I could find about survival and wilderness living before I came west, she replied. Then I asked questions and learned from people who knew what they were talking about. Most folks from back east think they can just show up and figure things out as they go. Caroline looked at him seriously. Most folks from back east haven't lost everything they cared about in one night and realized that book learning doesn't prepare you for real catastrophe. Jake remembered what Pete had told him about Caroline's family dying in a fire. Is that why you came out here? To escape the memories? I came out here because I realized I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life being afraid of losing people I cared about, or I could find people who needed help and try to make a difference. The memories came with me either way. They were interrupted by Maria Cloudwalker, who approached with news that made Jake's blood run cold. David has returned from watching, she reported. More of Mackenzie's men have arrived. They are bringing equipment. What kind of equipment? Jake asked. Ropes and climbing tools, and dynamite. Caroline went pale. They're planning to come down the canyon walls. Jake cursed under his breath. Mackenzie had apparently gotten tired of waiting and decided to end this the direct way. How much time do we have? David thinks maybe until tomorrow morning, Maria answered. They are making camp and will probably wait for full daylight. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Getting everyone out of the canyon in daylight with Mackenzie's men watching the exits would be nearly impossible. But staying here with dynamite coming down from above was suicide. There's another way out, Caroline said quietly. The Apache women know it, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than staying here. It involves swimming underwater through a tunnel in the rocks. The creek goes underground for about 50 feet before coming out on the far side of the north wall. Jake stared at her. You're talking about a sump. How do you even know it's passable? Because I've done it, Caroline replied calmly. Last week when we were exploring possible escape routes. It can be done, but not everyone will make it. Children can't hold their breath that long. No, but adults might be able to carry the smaller ones. It would require someone going through first to establish safety ropes and someone staying behind to help get everyone into the tunnel. Jake realized what she was suggesting. You're volunteering to be the one who stays behind. I'm the strongest swimmer, and I know the tunnel best. It makes the most sense. It also makes you the most likely to die if something goes wrong. Caroline met his eyes without flinching. These people have risked everything to protect me. I won't repay that by running away when they need help most. Jake had heard noble speeches before from people who folded when real danger appeared. But looking at Caroline's face, he believed she meant every word. More disturbing, he was starting to understand why the whole town was willing to fight for her. We'll think of something else, he said. There has to be another way. Mr. Mathers, Caroline said gently. Sometimes there isn't another way. Sometimes you just have to trust that people will do the right thing and hope for the best. As the sun set and the canyon filled with shadows, Jake found himself sitting by the small fire with Caroline while the Apache women prepared for what might be their last night of relative safety. The children were being remarkably quiet, though Jake could see the fear in their eyes. Tell me about this tunnel, he said. Everything you know about it. Caroline described the underwater passage in detail, including the risks and the techniques she had worked out for navigating it safely. As she talked, Jake found himself watching her face in the firelight, noting the way she chose her words carefully and the calm way she discussed potentially deadly dangers. You're not what I expected, he said when she finished. What did you expect? Jake considered the question. Someone softer, I guess, more helpless. The way people talked about you in town, I figured you for the kind of person who needed protecting. Caroline smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. I do need protecting sometimes. Everyone does. But I've learned that the best protection comes from being useful to the people around you. Is that what you're doing here? Being useful? I'm trying to. These women have taught me more about courage and generosity than all the books I ever read. They've shared their food with me, included me in their families, trusted me with their children's lives. The least I can do is try to be worthy of that trust. Jake stared into the fire, thinking about trust and worthiness and the strange turns life could take. A few days ago, he had been just another drifter with no particular destination in mind. Now he was responsible for getting 9 people out of a death trap, and one of those people was making him question assumptions he'd held for most of his adult life. "What made you so sure people would let you down?" Caroline asked quietly. The question caught Jake off guard. Experience, mostly. People talk about doing the right thing until it costs them something. Then they find excuses. All people? Most people. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What about the men who sent you here? They're risking their lives and homes to save people they barely know." Jake had to admit she had a point. Maybe they're the exception. Or maybe you've been spending time with the wrong people. One of the children, a little Apache girl of maybe 6 years old, approached the fire. She was carrying a small wooden doll that looked like it had been carved by loving hands. Caroline spoke to her in the Apache language, and the girl responded with a long explanation that involved pointing to the doll and then to Jake. "What did she say?" Jake asked. "She wanted to know if you were a good spirit or a bad spirit. I told her you were a good man who came to help us. She wants to give you her doll for luck." The little girl held out the wooden figure with solemn ceremony. Jake took it carefully, surprised by how detailed the carving was and how much it obviously meant to the child. "Thank you," he said to the girl, who smiled shyly and ran back to her mother. Jake examined the doll in the firelight. It was a woman figure, carved with skill and painted with natural dyes. The face had been done with particular care, showing a kind expression that reminded him somehow of Caroline. "That's quite an honor," Caroline said. "Her grandfather carved that for her before he died last winter. She's never let anyone else touch it." Jake felt an unexpected weight in his chest. "Why would she give it to me?" "Because she believes you're going to save us, and because children understand things about people that adults sometimes miss." Jake looked across the fire at Caroline, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The firelight played across her face, and he noticed details he had missed earlier. The small scar on her chin that suggested she'd taken a hard fall at some point. The calluses on her hands from work most Eastern ladies would never consider doing. The way she held herself like someone who had learned to rely on her own strength. "You really think we can get everyone out alive?" he asked. "I think we have to try. And I think between your skills and their courage, we have a better chance than you might expect." "What about you? What do you bring to this besides stubbornness?" Caroline's smile returned, warmer this time. "Hope, Mr. Mathers. Sometimes that's the most important thing of all." As the fire burned lower and the canyon settled into the quiet sounds of night, Jake found himself thinking about hope and courage and the strange woman who seemed to inspire both in everyone around her. He'd come here expecting to find another helpless victim who needed rescuing. Instead, he'd found someone who might end up rescuing him from assumptions he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The little girl's doll seemed to weigh more than wood should, like it was carved from compressed faith and handed over with absolute trust that he would prove worthy of it. Maybe Caroline was right about hope being important. Jake was starting to think he might need some of his own. Dawn brought the distant sound of voices from the canyon rim above. Mackenzie's men were preparing to descend, and Jake knew their time had run out. He'd spent most of the night working out details for the underwater escape. but every plan seemed to have fatal flaws. Caroline was already awake when Jake emerged from his makeshift shelter, quietly organizing the Apache women and children into groups. She moved with calm efficiency that impressed him, showing no signs of the fear that had to be eating at her. "Any changes in the plan?" she asked when she saw him. "Several," Jake replied. "I'm going through first with a rope. Maria and 2 of the other women will take the children in the middle group. You come last with whoever needs help." Caroline shook her head. "We discussed this. I should go first because I know the tunnel best. And I should go first because if something goes wrong, I'm the most likely to be able to fight my way out and warn the others. No arguments, remember?" Before Caroline could respond, David Bluehorse appeared at their camp like a ghost materializing from the rocks. His face was grim, and he spoke quickly to Maria in Apache before turning to Jake. "Mackenzie's men are coming down the east wall now, maybe 30 minutes before they reach bottom of canyon." Jake's blood chilled. 30 minutes wasn't enough time to get everyone through the tunnel safely. They'd be caught halfway through the escape attempt. "How many men?" he asked. 6 climbing down, more watching from above with rifles." Caroline stepped forward. "David, can you take word to your Uncle Joseph? Tell him to create a distraction on the south side of the canyon in exactly 20 minutes. David nodded and disappeared as quickly as he had come. "What kind of distraction?" Jake asked. "Joseph and his nephew can make it look like we're trying to break out through the main entrance. If they do it right, Mackenzie's men will focus their attention there and maybe not notice activity at the north end." Jake had to admire her tactical thinking, even as he worried about the Apache men risking their lives for another distraction that might not work. The next 20 minutes passed in tense preparation. Jake tested the underwater tunnel one more time, establishing anchor points for the safety rope and marking the route with rocks that could be felt in the darkness. The water was shockingly cold, and the 50-foot swim through pitch-black tunnel felt like it took forever. When he emerged on the far side, Jake could hear rifle fire from the south end of the canyon. Joseph's distraction had begun right on schedule. Swimming back through the tunnel, Jake found Caroline and the others ready to begin the escape. The first group consisted of Maria Cloudwalker and 2 children who were strong swimmers. Jake went through with them, helping guide the children through the dark water and getting them safely to the far side. The second group included 3 more women and the remaining children. This trip was harder, as one of the smaller children panicked halfway through and nearly drowned before Maria managed to calm him down and get him moving again. By the time Jake made it back for the final group, he could hear shouts from Mackenzie's men as they discovered the empty camp. The distraction wouldn't last much longer. Caroline was waiting with the last Apache woman, an elderly grandmother who moved slowly, but with dignity. The gunfire from the south end of the canyon was getting closer, which meant Joseph and David were being forced to retreat. "You 2 go first," Jake told Caroline. "I'll bring up the rear and make sure no one follows." "The grandmother can't swim that distance," Caroline replied. "I'll have to help her through, and that means someone needs to stay behind to make sure we get a clean start." Jake realized she was right. The old woman would need help every foot of the way through the tunnel, and Caroline was the only one she trusted completely. "I'll stay and cover your escape," he said. "Give you a 5-minute head start, then follow." "No." Caroline's voice was firm. "If you stay behind, they'll kill you. We go together or not at all." "That's not how this works, Miss Porter. Someone has to—" "My name is Caroline," she interrupted. "And I told you, I don't abandon people. That includes stubborn drifters who think they have to save everyone else." The argument was settled by the sound of boots on rock very close by. Mackenzie's men had found their location and were approaching fast. "Move!" Jake hissed, helping the grandmother into the water. Caroline slipped into the creek beside him, and together they guided the old woman toward the tunnel entrance. The grandmother was frightened but brave, trusting them to get her through safely. Jake went first, feeling his way through the dark tunnel with one hand while towing the grandmother with the other. Caroline came behind, one hand on the safety rope and the other supporting the old woman's legs to keep her moving forward. The 50-foot swim seemed to take hours. Jake's lungs burned from holding his breath, and he could feel the grandmother starting to panic as her own air ran out. Behind him, Caroline's movements were getting more desperate as she fought to keep all three of them moving toward the exit. Finally, Jake's head broke the surface on the far side of the tunnel. He hauled the grandmother up onto the rocky shore and turned to help Caroline, who emerged a few seconds later, gasping for air and shaking from cold and exhaustion. "Everyone made it," Maria called softly from the shadows where she had hidden the rest of the group. "But we need to move quickly. Mackenzie's men will figure out the tunnel soon enough." Jake helped Caroline to her feet, noting that she was shivering uncontrollably from the cold water and stress. Her lips were blue, and she could barely stand without support. "We need to get you warm," he said, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. "I'm fine," Caroline replied through chattering teeth. "We need to keep moving." "You're not fine. You're hypothermic and exhausted. Maria, is there shelter nearby?" "Old mine shaft about a mile from here," Maria replied. "Hidden from main trails but warm and dry inside." Jake made the decision quickly. "Take everyone there. I'll carry Caroline." "I can walk," Caroline protested weakly, but her knees buckled before she could take a step. Jake swept her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt and how natural it seemed to hold her. "Save your strength for staying alive," he told her. The mile to the mine shaft passed in a blur of careful navigation through rough terrain while trying to leave no trail that could be followed. Caroline drifted in and out of consciousness, her body heat slowly returning as Jake's own warmth transferred through their shared contact. The mine shaft turned out to be more comfortable than expected. Someone, probably Apache travelers, had used it as a shelter before and left supplies including dry firewood and blankets. Maria quickly started a small fire, while the other women organized the children in the driest part of the cave. Jake settled Caroline near the fire and wrapped her in every blanket they could find. She was still shivering but no longer seemed in immediate danger from the cold. "Thank you," she whispered when he checked on her a few minutes later. "For what?" "For not leaving me behind. For keeping your word about not sacrificing some to save others." Jake studied her face in the firelight. Even exhausted and half frozen, she was concerned about other people's well-being. "You did pretty well yourself back there. That grandmother would have drowned without you." Caroline smiled faintly. "We make a good team." "I suppose we do." The next few hours passed quietly as everyone recovered from the escape and tried to stay warm in the mine shaft. Jake took first watch at the entrance, while the Apache women tended to the children, and Caroline gradually returned to normal body temperature. When Maria came to relieve him at the watch, Jake found Caroline sitting by the dying fire, staring into the glowing coals with an expression of deep sadness. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her on the rocky floor. "I was thinking about what happens next. Mackenzie won't give up just because we escaped the canyon. He'll keep coming after these families, and eventually he'll find them. All we've done is postpone the inevitable." Jake had been thinking the same thing, but he was surprised that Caroline had reached the same conclusion. "So, what do you want to do about it?" "I don't know. Go back east, maybe. Take the heat off these people by removing myself from the situation." "Is that what you really want?" Caroline was quiet for a long time. "What I want is to live in a world where people like Gerald Mackenzie don't get to destroy innocent lives just because they have money and power. What I want is to build something here that lasts, something that makes a real difference. But wanting something doesn't make it possible." Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up toward the mine shaft ceiling. You know what I wanted when I rode into Copper Creek a few days ago? What? To drink some whiskey, maybe play some cards, then move on to the next town and do it all over again. I'd been doing that for years, telling myself it was freedom but really just running from anything that might matter. What changed? Jake looked at her, this woman who had somehow turned his carefully ordered cynicism upside down in less than 3 days. I met someone who showed me that giving a damn about other people isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes life worth living. Caroline's eyes widened slightly. Jake, I'm not good with words, Caroline. Never have been. But I want you to know that you've changed something in me. Changed how I see things, how I think about what's important. You've changed things for me, too, she said softly. I came out here thinking I had to do everything alone, that depending on other people would just lead to more loss. You've shown me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust someone else to help carry the load. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn lower and listening to the quiet sounds of the mine shaft around them. Jake was acutely aware of Caroline's presence beside him, the way she moved, the sound of her breathing, the faint scent of her hair. "What are you thinking?" she asked eventually. "I'm thinking that maybe people aren't as disappointing as I used to believe, present company especially." Caroline smiled, and Jake felt something tight and cold in his chest start to warm and loosen. High praise, coming from someone who's spent years expecting the worst from humanity. Well, you've had plenty of chances to prove me right. Could have saved yourself and left the Apache women behind. Could have let me take all the risks while you stayed safe. Could have given up when things got difficult. But you didn't do any of those things. Neither did you. You could have taken the $40 and ridden away. Could have saved just me and left the others. Could have decided this whole mess wasn't worth risking your life for. Jake had to admit she had a point. So what does that make us? Hopeful, I guess. Foolish and hopeful. I can live with that. Caroline leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so natural and trusting that it caught Jake completely off guard. For a moment he tensed, every instinct telling him that letting someone get this close was dangerous. Then her breathing deepened, and he realized she had fallen asleep, her head resting against his chest like she trusted him completely to keep her safe while she was vulnerable. Jake sat very still, afraid that any movement might wake her. Caroline's face was peaceful in sleep, free of the worry and determination that had marked her expressions during their time in the canyon. She looked younger, softer, and Jake found himself studying the curve of her cheek and the way her eyelashes cast shadows in the firelight. This was the moment he had always mocked when other men talked about it. The tender scene where a tough guy's heart supposedly melted because a woman showed trust and vulnerability. Jake had always dismissed such stories as sentimental nonsense, weakness disguised as romance. But sitting there with Caroline's sleeping form warm against his chest, Jake understood for the first time that tenderness wasn't make-believe. It was real, powerful, and terrifying in ways he had never imagined. The weight of Caroline's trust settled around him like a responsibility he had never wanted, but suddenly couldn't imagine giving up. She had chosen to fall asleep in his arms, to trust him with her safety during her most vulnerable moments. The magnitude of that gift hit him like a physical blow. Jake had spent years building walls against this exact feeling, convinced that caring about someone was just setting himself up for inevitable loss and disappointment. But as he watched Caroline sleep and felt her steady breathing against his chest, he realized that the walls he'd built weren't protecting him from weakness. They were protecting him from the strongest force he'd ever encountered. Love, he realized, was not the soft emotion he'd always dismissed. It was fierce, demanding, and absolutely terrifying in its power to change everything about how a person saw the world. Hours passed. Jake didn't sleep, partly because he was listening for signs of pursuit and partly because he didn't want to miss a moment of this strange new feeling that was rewriting everything he thought he knew about himself. When Caroline finally stirred as dawn light filtered through the mine entrance, she looked up at Jake with sleepy confusion that quickly turned to embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting up and putting distance between them. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you." It was fine," Jake said quietly. "More than fine." Something in his voice made Caroline look at him more closely. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake almost laughed. In a way, he had seen a ghost, the ghost of the man he used to be, fading away in the light of what he was becoming. "I'm different than I was yesterday," he said. "Different than I was an hour ago." Caroline studied his face with the careful attention she brought to everything important. "Different how?" Jake met her eyes, seeing understanding dawn in their depths as she read the truth in his expression. "I used to think tenderness was just a pretty lie people told themselves," he said. "Something weak people clung to because they couldn't face how hard the world really is. And now I think maybe it's the only thing strong enough to make the hard world worth living in." Caroline's smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains, slow, warm, and transforming everything it touched. "Does this mean you're staying in Copper Creek?" "I'm staying wherever you are," Jake replied. "If you'll have me." Caroline reached for his hand, and Jake marveled at how something as simple as intertwined fingers could feel like the most natural and extraordinary thing in the world. "I thought you were just passing through," she said. "I was. But it turns out some places are worth stopping for." Outside the mine shaft, the world was waking up to another day of uncertainty and danger. Mackenzie was still out there, still a threat that would have to be dealt with. The Apache families still needed protection, and Copper Creek still needed people willing to stand up for what was right. But for the first time in his adult life, Jake Mathers was ready to fight for something besides his own survival. He was ready to build instead of just drifting, to care instead of just existing, to trust that some things really were worth the risk of loss. All because a stubborn schoolteacher had fallen asleep in his arms and shown him that tenderness wasn't make-believe after all. It was the most real thing in the world.